of basketball and other sports. Invited guests include Johnny Rhodes, Keith Booth, Fang Mitchell, Walt Williams, and others. Enjoy the games, silent auction, and much more. For tickets, call 410-727-1539 or visit BabeRuthMuseum.org.
The Zone Superstore features the largest selection of purple gear that you will ever encounter. Men's, ladies, kids, art, automotive, everything purple you could possibly imagine, and then some more. Located off exit 29B at 1744 East Chopper Road. Visit them online at thezonesuperstore.com or give them a call, 410-574-7283. The Zone Superstore, where the Purple Nation shops.
Hi, I'm a famous Hollywood celebrity, and I was told to tell you about the advantages to getting your windows tinted at D&L Window Tinting. Like how it can keep you cool in the summer, the safety it can provide, and enhanced privacy. But basically, I want to tell you how to get it simply because I said so.
D&L Window Tinting. They put the shades on sun. With 2 locations at 2200 East Chopper Road and 10811 Pulaski Highway. No appointment necessary. Celebrity voices impersonated. Poorly.
Hey, Tiger Town. Want the latest sports news on your Towson Tigers? Visit TowsonTigers.com to see video highlights, read blogs, and follow all the updates on your favorite college sports team. With information on all 20 Division I sports, along with schedules, ticket information, and multimedia, TowsonTigers.com is the source for Tiger athletics. And be sure to watch and listen to all the live game broadcasts every week through the Towson Sports Network. It's TowsonTigers.com, your one-stop shop for all things Tiger athletics.
Live from the WNST studios in Towson. Brought to you by the Zone Superstore, where the Purple Nation shops. We return to the MobTown Sports Beat with Thyrl Nelson. This is the MobTown Sports Beat. Here's Thyrl Nelson.
Welcome in, MobTown Sports Beat, 410-481-1570, the number, WNST.net, the website, Tuesday edition. Brett Dickinson joining me in studio, weekend warrior Brett Dickinson. So it's all Flacco all the time, huh? Tell me how surprised you were by, if at all, by sort of the reaction, the backlash, the ugliness that fans who have no real interest in the Ravens all of a sudden worried about them hamstringing themselves. GMs everywhere, amateur GMs everywhere now, smarter than the smartest GM in the NFL.
This is one of the smartest contracts I've seen put together. There was the Michael Vick contract a couple years ago. Granted, they gave him $20 million, but they were able to get out of it after 2 years.
Yeah.
And they, it doesn't cost them anything if they wanted to trade him away after redoing his deal and kind of got out of that one. But this one is 10 times better than that contract was ever formed because the amount of money that's saved the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you look at the TV deal that's coming up. And Ozzy's a smart man.
Some are saying it's going to be $140 million or more under the salary.
But then some are saying it's not going to be a drastic hike the first couple years. But either way, Ozzy knew what he was doing when he looked at that TV deal in a couple years and knowing that the salary cap's at least going to go up a little bit.
Well, and you don't think that Joe Linta, Joe Flacco, Ozzie Newsome, when they sat down and looked at the terms of this contract, saw that 2016 cap number of nearly $29 million and said, look, man, we're going to have to work something out before we get back here. And guess what? We also have sort of the perfect backdrop to set that up because Tom Brady just looked benevolent for guaranteeing himself $60 million. Ben Roethlisberger just took essentially a $19 million salary of his own and stretched it out by way of calling it a signing bonus now all of a sudden, or a roster bonus for him that suddenly gets prorated against the remaining years of his contract. So these are sides that are going to be back to the table in the next couple of years, which might be the bad thing for the Ravens.
It's a 3-year deal for the Ravens.
Right.
What it is. And a lot of people don't understand, and that's the way the NFL contracts work is
because they love to lie to us, Brett. They love to tell us how, it's $120.1 million.
I can guarantee Joe Flacco is not going to get $120 million unless he goes off and wins the Super Bowl every single year.
Well, yeah.
Which is,
Well, and he takes substantial leverage into the next round of negotiations because the Ravens won't even have the franchise tag at their disposal then. It'll be, look, pay him, the $26.9 million that he's assigned under the salary cap, or renegotiate under his terms. And I guess, you can also look at this as sort of a learning process for him about, how they're going to spend the rest of that money around him, how important he now sort of becomes as the franchise savior, those types of things. I think what everyone is hung up on right now is the 0.6. If he had come in at 119.9, and it wound up being just under $20 million per year, just below Drew Brees in terms of annual compensation, then I don't think anyone would have had much to say. But it's all of a sudden when you put highest paid per annum and overall in NFL history, and you say, well, wait a minute. This guy isn't the best quarterback in the NFL right now. He's certainly not the best quarterback in NFL history. How does he walk away with that money? I'm going to tell you who should be mad. And I've been thinking about this a lot because, number one, every player who is not a starting quarterback right now should be a little bit angry. Because where everyone else sort of has seen the cold side of the NFL business, unless you're Calvin Johnson, unless you're Larry Fitzgerald, because wide receiver is another special position, and even then you have to be, that top 2 or 3 guys.
Cream of the crop.
Maybe Rob Gronkowski fits into that slightly. Jimmy Graham, I imagine, could sort of follow cues from him as well. But otherwise, everyone else, left tackles, defensive ends, the most important positions in football have all seen sort of the cold side of this NFL business where we know 100% because we played out the scenarios in our minds. The Ravens' choices were pay this guy $20.5 million under the cap this year, all guaranteed. Pay him $14 million, but ultimately pay him whatever he was able to negotiate with your rivals. Take the most important contract, the biggest contract in franchise history out of your hands completely as it relates to negotiations, or just let him walk, which we know was never going to happen, or you go to the table and you play ball with him, which was, the lesser of 4 evils, essentially. And other quarterbacks have to be looking around and saying, well, I'm Matt Ryan. I haven't won a Super Bowl yet, but the Falcons can't afford to let me go. I'm Matt Stafford. I haven't won a Super Bowl and I've only been to the playoffs one time, but I don't think the Lions can afford to let me go. And, I'm Colin Kaepernick, and I'm the next big thing, and I don't think the 49ers can afford to let me go. And you clearly, there's this guy, Aaron Rodgers, who is going to cash in this.
I don't think Green Bay can afford to let him go anytime soon.
Big way. So if you're not an NFL quarterback, then you should be angry because this sort of resets or brings clarity to the leverage that quarterbacks have in this market. And, if you're Matt Schaub, you're probably a little bit angry as well, right?
Yeah,
he's got to be firing his agent today, right?
Yeah. There's got to be some discussion going on in Matt Schaub's camp about where's my money at kind of thing. But,
yeah.
But you mentioned it, and it's exactly what it is. And this is the NFL, and it's a quarterback-driven league now. And it kind of always has been a quarterback-driven league. The stars have always been the quarterbacks. But Joe Flacco just happened to be the next really good quarterback up for a contract. That's all it is. It's not that he's the best player in the league. It's not that he's outperformed any of the other quarterbacks that you mentioned. It's the fact that he was the next really good quarterback.
And it's not even that he won the Super Bowl, because I think that's where everybody is way too hung up right now. It has nothing to do with the fact that he won the Super Bowl.
He would have got very similar money, very similar, if he didn't win the Super Bowl, if they would have went to another AFC Championship game and didn't win it.
If they'd have lost that game in Denver.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He would have got very similar money. It just happens to be he's the next really good quarterback to be up for a contract. And we'll see it. Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers coming up, Matthew Stafford, Colin Kaepernick. We'll see them. And he will eventually be, this contract will eventually be number 9 or 10 down the list in about 6 years when the contract's supposed to be up. And it's going to be one of those things. He's going to have to redo his contract in 3 years anyway, so it's nothing to get too hung up on.
So if you're a fan of another team, then you have reason to be upset about this, right?
Well,
because
right.
Joe Flacco's contract is going to cost your team money, if not now, immediately, pretty soon.
Eventually, every team's going to have a franchise quarterback at one point or another, and it's just completely going to keep growing, progressively grow from franchise quarterback to franchise quarterback signing a new contract. And eventually, I mean, even if you're the Oakland Raiders right now, somewhere down the road, you're going to have a franchise quarterback, and you're going to have to pay him more than the
Thyrl Pryor, right?
Yeah.
410-481-1570, the number. And again, the other choices are, let him go to free agency. And we've learned that there are, and this is why, again, for all of the places that we want to start to point blame as to who it is that's sort of responsible for the way that this thing unfolded. And, so many have talked about Raheem Moore as being at the heart of it. To me, it's Robert Griffin III, and more specifically the Redskins positioning to get Robert Griffin III, because that cemented the expectation or the perception that teams would be willing to give up high draft picks if it meant that they could go get a franchise player. And they wouldn't do it for a franchise running back. They wouldn't do it for a franchise linebacker. They probably wouldn't do it for a franchise wide receiver. but they would certainly do it for a franchise quarterback because there just aren't enough of those to go around. And, as you mentioned, that the quarterback has always sort of been the glamour position, but there have been times where you could win with Mark Rippon, you could win with Trent Dilfer, you could win with Brad Johnson, and I think that the more we shift the rules to cater to the offense, the more we sort of acknowledge that this is a wide-open offensive league, the more we get into, sort of this basketball era of NFL football, the more leverage the quarterback continues to wield. And there's a short list of about 7 to 10 guys that you could really feel confident give you a chance. And with 32 teams, I mean, the math simply says that those guys are going to remain in demand. And so the Ravens did the best with what with the hand that they were dealt. And again, maybe most importantly, they're sort of on the front of this thing, right? I mean, they have now set the market, and maybe Drew Brees was on the very front of it. Maybe the Saints were on the very front of it, but they are far enough out in front that, again, the trickle-down effects are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're probably going to take a giant leap forward when the guy in the negotiating chair is Aaron Rodgers. And so for now, you sort of followed cues with Drew Brees. The other big winner, of course, Joe Linta, because now I'm sure he's already got business cards in the works that say, I got Joe Flacco, the biggest contract in NFL history.
Yeah, Joe Linta is also getting paid a nice little price tag off of this as well. So congratulations to Joe Linta, a guy from smaller background that found his way with one guy, and now look at him.
He'll be Drew Rosenhaus before you know it.
I hope not.
410-481-1570. The number. It is hour number one of the MobTown Sports Beat, talking a little about, where the Ravens go from here. And, again, having prepared themselves, because you have to imagine that, no matter how well negotiations were going, the Ravens were looking at worst-case scenarios, right? Sometimes that's the easiest way to deal with reality, right? You figure, what's the worst that could happen? How would I react to that? And then you begin to work backward from there and say, well, here's how we make the best of a bad situation. If it wound up being, either 14 or 20 million that they were going to have to account for under the salary cap with Joe Flacco, now at a number less than he had last year, a lot of the decisions that we saw as pressing maybe don't need to be pressed as quickly. Maybe Vontae Leach is around for another year now. Maybe you keep Jones and Bolden under the contracts that they have and wait and see what the market sort of delivers moving forward. I still think that there's a substantial likelihood that a number of these guys are gone, but, this is at least a short-term bonus. I don't guess that it's going to make them go out and make, big splashes in free agency, but certainly that's something to consider. And you were talking about left tackle. I mean, you put this much stock in a position like quarterback, you better make sure that the guy who's watching his back is qualified to do so. And whether or not the Ravens can have confidence in Bryant McKinney moving forward in that regard is certainly at the heart of this debate for right now.
Oh, that's why I was mentioning Brandon Albert. The guys were relatively young for the position at 27. Still got his best years ahead of him, and is a guy that kind of fits what the Ravens want to do on the offensive line, and it's get guys up into the second level. And Brandon Albert's pretty good at doing that, but he's also going to cost a couple draft picks. But you might be able to get him cheaper than you would a guy like Jake Long or a guy like Ryan Clady if he happened to hit the free agent market, which I believe he is franchised.
So you're suggesting they might go after him with an offer sheet, like not work out a deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, but actually go after him with an offer sheet.
There would be one of two options. Is the offer sheet is my first option. Is that depending on what kind of tag and where their offer is at, that they're not going to give up first round pick for Brandon Albert, but maybe they can work out a deal where they end up giving him a third and maybe a fourth. You have 10, 11 picks. You have the availability to do this. Chiefs just gave up a second-round pick, their second-round pick, which was essentially a back-end first-round pick, the second pick in the
one pick behind where the Ravens happen to be picking in the first round.
Exactly, for Alex Smith. So they may be looking to add a couple more young guys into the mix, and if they do get a left tackle with the first pick in the draft, they makes Brandon Albert expendable, and you don't want to bring him out as price tag at left guard as you would at a left tackle. So maybe the Ravens can work something out there.
How well equipped does this team look to to come back and defend right now? I mean, start with the division, and that's the other thing that I think people are failing to account for is that they say, and again, we can overstate this because we could find lots of teams with good defenses and good running games that don't have the quarterback weight to get things done or haven't had the quarterback play to get themselves very far along in the playoffs. Minnesota Vikings would certainly stand out as last year's sort of flavor of the month in that way.
Andy Dalton, the Bengals, is a prime example, and it's Andy Dalton's dealing with something that not as similar to Joe Flacco, but something similar to Joe Flacco did in his early on in his career. Was a guy that was just getting the team to the playoffs and being happy with it. And, we can see the future with them. But Andy Dalton could be a guy that maybe a couple years from now takes that next step and leads that team to a Super Bowl.
Well, and the other team that is always going to be present until they declare them dead, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Although again, it seems to be sort of a gloomy, doomy off season for them.
They need an IV this off season.
Well, but we were talking about that last year, and again, they come back and they go 8-8. But when you really look at the talent, I mean, if you put those guys out there healthy with a decent enough running game, with the wide receivers that they have, they obviously need some improvements on the offensive line, but that was still one of the top defenses in NFL football last year. And that's a team that, if not for a couple of ill-advised Ben Roethlisberger interceptions, you forget about the time that he spent down, due to injury. Now, that's a team that's a couple of ill-advised interceptions away from being in the playoffs, and once they're there, anything can happen, as the Ravens have learned at their hands year after year after year. Again, in terms of total talent, the Pittsburgh Steelers last year deserved to be in the conversation with the best teams in football. And while their record didn't necessarily reflect it, we can put some of that on coaching. And I'm not going to call Mike Tomlin a bad coach, but we might say he did a pretty bad coaching job last year. You wouldn't expect that to happen 2 seasons in a row, and so I'm not yet ready to bury them. And am I right in saying that in at least 2 of the 5 years, it would have to be 2 because the Steelers didn't make it this year, but at least 2 of the 5 years that Joe Flacco and these Ravens have been, in the playoffs each and every year, the AFC North has sent 3 teams to the playoffs, and in every other year, I'm going to venture to guess that they sent at least 2, which makes them one of the most stacked divisions in football for sure.
Yeah, they sent two different teams in the past 5 years, and 3 with Cincinnati last two seasons ago.
08 and 2011, I believe.
2011, yes, yeah. So it's been a very good division, but I think you're looking at a team like Cincinnati coming up, whereas a team like Pittsburgh is going down, and Ravens are one of those teams that will consistently stay where they're at for the next couple years. I don't expect this team to come out and be a 14-2 team next year.
Right.
There's no expectation of that. I didn't expect that this year, and we obviously saw what it was. But I expect this team to be in the hunt. It's going to be a 9-7, 10-6 team. They're going to lose some players. They're going to have to take a step back in certain spots, but they might take a step forward in other spots, especially the quarterback position. Flacco is more comfortable now. And this team could be a 10-6 team again next year, win the division, and make a similar run that they did last year. I expect them to do that.
Which sort of invites 2 conversations that we've been having ongoing, throughout football season. And again, they're sort of, philosophies that I don't want to say created, but certainly thought about and bought into, basically talked myself into. The first is that, this 16-game season isn't about going 14-2 or winning 16 games. It's about, putting yourself in deep water a number of times, testing yourself, developing a level of comfort in certain situations, and then hoping to put that experience to use when you get to the point in time where you're able to, to put it to use when it comes to, the most important part of the year. The other thing, and I think it's best evidenced by the way that the Ravens carried themselves last year, I mean, they lost top-end talent. They lost Ben Grubbs, who was arguably the best or second-best player on the offensive line. They lost Jared Johnson, who was arguably the best or second-best player, especially with Suggs being out in the linebacker core. They lost Corey Redding, who was really coming into his own as not only a defender, but seemingly as a leader as well on this defense, in addition to some role players. And they filled those positions with guys that, didn't go out and set the world on fire by any stretch of the imagination, but guys that were good enough. And maybe more importantly, they addressed the 2 key positions that cost them in the playoffs the year before. They changed over Lee Evans essentially for Jacoby Jones. And Jacoby Jones not a world beater. If the Ravens put him out on the free agent market, it's not as though everyone is coming to knock down his door, especially not to be a wide receiver. And they replaced their kicker. And in so doing, they shored up the bottom end of the roster more so than the top end, and they were left with no suspects out there when it became playoff time, when the price of poker went up. And so even if you look at Ed Reed is gone, and we'll concede that Paul Kruger is gone, and we'll concede that Kerry Williams is gone, again, expecting that Ozzie is going to find something in this year's draft of use to these Ravens. I mean, there are very few spots that we could look at where we expect a guy back this year that you could say they're weak. That you could say that need to be replaced. And so all of a sudden, as it becomes a draft priority, we go into drafts all the time and say, well, the Ravens need a defensive end. The Ravens need a safety, a defensive tackle, whatever the position might be. I think that they are free and clear. I think that whatever comes to them in the first round, they will happily take, because there's nobody out there that screams to be replaced right now. There's some holes that need to be filled, but there's no one that we expect to be back right now that you say, man, we got to do better than X.
Well, that's what Ozzie has done so well over the past several years, and a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers that you mentioned earlier has done pretty well in remaining consistent, is that they find depth, and you don't need a team full of superstars. You need a team full of deep players that all can step in and play. And you have guys on this roster right now like Asa Jackson, who really didn't play all season long, who's going to make an impact next year for this Ravens team one way or another. You find a guy like Corey Graham in the offseason that fills in the spot at cornerback position that, really helped in the depth and ended up starting and being one of the better corners on this team. You lose Tom Zibikowski and a rookie Nakamura to free agency, and you fill that with James Ahedebo. You get a guy like Sean Considine. You get some depth, and they understand that getting value players to fill in spots is more important than hitting a home run every single time.
Well, and if you're a veteran and you've been around this league for a number of years, odds are you've heard someone who used to be a Raven say, man, that's a great organization. They do things the right way there. If you ever had a chance to play for the Ravens, you might want to take it. There's a chance that you know a guy who has gone there and sort of revived his career, parlayed it into a pretty good payday. And so if you, for some reason, find yourself on the street, in the month of August with a choice to make and teams beckoning for you, and the Ravens are in that group, you might feel compelled to go kick the tires on that team because, again, it's provided opportunities for a lot of guys. The blueprint certainly seems to be there, which is why, as much as I'm hoping otherwise, I'm not necessarily letting go of the notion that that might be how the Ravens look to address that left tackle position with Michael Orr as the hold your breath insurance policy. 410-481-1570, the number. Quick reminder, you are listening to 1570 AM, WNST Towson, Baltimore, and streaming live on the web at WNST.net. We never stop talking Baltimore sports. This hour brought to you by Starbucks. Between the snooze button and the shower, or between crunch time and meeting time with Starbucks Via, there's always time for Starbucks. Just add hot water, stir, and enjoy. Look for Starbucks Via where you buy groceries. We're probably expecting Alan McCallum in the next 10 minutes or so. Open lines for you, right? Let's go get one. I was going to wait till after the break, but Bruce has been holding. Bruce is in Parkville. Bruce, welcome.
Hey, what's up, Thyrl?
The fam, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's up, brother? Just hanging in there, chilling, get ready for the snow, man. Went out last night. It was a bad boy, but I was all right,
I hear you, man. What's going on?
Well, just taking life day by day. You know what I mean? How you been doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm getting ready for college basketball season, and I'm celebrating a Joe Flacco contract right now.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm getting ready for the March Madness. Might have to get a new bookie. I don't know. He hasn't been around too much lately. He must have got pounded. Now, about the Orioles, everybody's known for the last 2 or 3 months or 4 months, whatever, since Reynolds left. I sort of, I like Reynolds and all. And I wish we could get him back to replace him. Honestly, it would have been great to keep Reynolds around at first base. Plus, he would have had all spring training, and the way he played the last, 2 months, it really didn't matter. But then spring training would have had all spring training to play first base. And away, what did Cleveland get him, $6 million?
6.5, 6, yeah.
Six, in between 6 and 7.
Okay, and then the Orioles, I think he won at 11, but then he goes there. But once he went there, we couldn't counter the offer, right, or whatever, right?
It really wasn't so much that. And I hate to cut you short there. I appreciate the call. But, as it stood, the Orioles had to make an offer sheet to him. They had to, make him a qualifying offer, and that was going to be in the ballpark, as Fem says, it was about $11 million, and they weren't going there. After that, though, he became a free agent, and the word that came out of Reynolds' camp throughout his free agency was that,
no word.
You're right, that he hadn't heard anything from the Orioles. So if they wanted, that they could have very well taken a tact with him, and he seemed like a guy who was happy enough here that you would say, look, go out and get your best offer, bring it back to us, and we'll make a decision as to whether or not we can afford to match it. And I don't want to be part of the crowd that is all of a sudden saying, man, the guy was a tremendous first baseman to finish last year. I don't know. I think that, and again, for as much as we celebrate Buck Showalter, it's not going to be popular. We'll bring it up with Alan McCallum when he gets here as well. But as much as we celebrate Showalter and his impact on this team, there are two things that stood out to me as sort of, backwards. Number one was the handling of Mark Reynolds. Not only consistently deploying him in the 7th spot, but to bring him back as a third baseman last year when we clearly knew that was going to be a detriment to the team. Just seemed to be a misguided attempt at best. The other leaving J.J. Hardy, I was ready to say Nolan Ryan, but leaving J.J. Hardy in the 2-hole with the second worst OBP among qualifying batters in all of baseball. Certainly seemed to be a swing and a miss if we're going to be sort of, pungent about it. So, as things stand right now, forget about Reynolds last year. And I could throw last year completely out the window because, in all honesty, it was a down year power-wise. And when folks want to make an argument against Reynolds, they point to 25 home runs last year. The things that have always seen Reynolds fall out of favor with fans were the errors at third base. You can't live with them, and I'm not going to try to apologize for them. I think that by moving into first base, you didn't make him a plus first baseman, but at the very least, you abated some of those errors. Moreover, you have the option of designated hitter where he apparently didn't want to play, but where he apparently will be playing for the Cleveland Indians as things go forward. The other thing was he's the second best guy on the team in on-base percentage over the last several years, second only to Nick Markakis. And if your job as a baseball player is first and foremost not to make outs, then you have to consider that valuable. He's the only, until proven otherwise, legitimate 40-home run threat that this team had. And so to part company with him under those circumstances, for me, was difficult. And for $6 million was certainly difficult. And you could say he wasn't a fit, but it winds up being about money, as everything with this Orioles team is, and maybe evidence no better than by the fact that they were willing to let Joe Saunders walk away because they really had no use for him, and he was going to make actual money. And now apparently you have some interest in Aaron Harang, I'm hearing.
That's a typical move by this front office. That it's just one of those moves that's frustrates you. And it's funny we mentioned in Mark Reynolds. I actually watched Moneyball again for like the third time yesterday while I was sitting at home, and it's really funny to see a guy like that has the ability just to get on base, and that's your main objective in baseball is to just get on base, and then everything else will have to work itself out. If you get 4 guys on base in a row, that's at least 1 run. Yeah,
well, and you leave them in the 7 hole, which I think is a mistake. And we could talk about the ability to move runners forward, make productive outs. Again, make no outs, and that's the ultimate goal I would tend to think for a baseball player, especially playing Oriole baseball where you don't sacrifice a lot, where you don't steal a lot, those types of things. You put a legitimate leadoff hitter in front of him. You put 2 guys that you don't want to pitch to with men on base behind him, and all of a sudden a guy who is pretty thoughtful about the strike zone. Now, he swings and misses a lot in the strike zone, but he doesn't chase a lot of bad stuff. He swings and misses a lot in the strike zone, but all of a sudden you take a guy who's pretty thoughtful about the strike zone, and you give him more fastballs, and you give him more strikes, and, again, we could diminish as much as we want. He won games last year against the Yankees. He won games that kept the Orioles in the thick of things, and this is a team that's not yet ready to be competitive. This is a team that, maybe got a little further ahead of themselves than they would have liked to, or than they certainly expected to last year, and aren't going to be swayed by that, and I can't necessarily blame them for it. I talk about the Mariners all the time as a team that won 85 and 88 games twice over the last 7 years. In so doing, got pretty far ahead of themselves, decided to try and operate in windows, went out and made a big splash for Sean Figgins, went out and made a big trade to get Eric Bedard, and as a result, the best player on the Orioles now, resides in center field because he didn't project to be what they thought was going to be a big component in a team that was ready to compete then. Those Mariners never did compete, and so, do I blame the Orioles for not getting too far ahead of themselves? Absolutely not. Do I think that at $6 million, Reynolds was worth another go-around? 100% I do. And do I think it was about money? Well, when we're talking Aaron Harang, after we just said we don't need Joe Saunders, then, yeah, absolutely we're talking about money.
It's always going to be about money. It doesn't matter what team it is, and especially with this team. We know the history of this team. But looking at a guy like Mark Reynolds, and it's not the problem that they didn't pay him the $6 million. They decided that $6 million or $8 million, whatever he would have liked from the Orioles was too much for him. It's the fact that who they brought in to replace him. And they brought in a guy named Danny Valencia.
Right.
And he is nowhere near the player that Mark Reynolds is. And that's where the problem is you don't bring in a replacement. Now, granted, you're moving Chris Davis to first base. Okay, that's fine. But you need to bring in somebody that's going to play every day at DH and be a solid contributor to this lineup. And Danny Valencia is not that guy.
Well, and it's sort of funny because I was looking at splits yesterday. And, there's so much talk about a Reimold and McLeod platoon. Okay, and I start to look at Reimold's numbers, and again, first and foremost, you have to hope that he's going to be healthy, but his numbers don't really split that well, nor do McLeod's, to be honest with you, but you'd probably rather not have McLeod go against left-handed pitching if you could help it. Valencia is a guy who stars against left-handed pitching, so now all of a sudden, what Reimold's winds up being is an everyday player with, you sort of split that left field DH spot, and put Valencia in against the lefties, put McLeod in against the righties, and move Reimold perhaps back and forth between left field and DH on those days. And, again, he's already a guy that's dealing with injuries. We knew that to be part and parcel out of the Nolan Reimold package, going into this season. And it appears that the Orioles are going to be scrambling there. But, again, if they simply embrace the fact that, look, we're going to take 162 games and try some guys out and figure out who are ball players on this team. We were encouraged last year that we might have had a few more ball players than we thought. Then I'm okay with that approach. But I wish that they could be a little bit more honest in selling that to us.
Yeah. The other option would be at the DH position, especially is if Brian Roberts proves himself to be healthy and can be a four day out of a week kind of guy where he can get out there and play 3 or 4 games. Is that maybe you have a guy like Ryan Flaherty playing DH as well. So you have some options there, but it's the fact that they brought in Danny Valencia was the exact replacement of Mark Reynolds is the problem.
No doubt. 410-481-1570, the number. We never stop talking.
WNST.net. We never stop texting Baltimore sports.
It's the